The clink of wine glasses, the low murmur of conversations, and the rhythmic scrape of silverware painted the usual symphony of Southern bloom. The upscale restaurant nestled in Atlanta's historic district. It was the kind of place where the marble floors never scuffed, the linen napkins were folded with military precision, and the grand piano in the corner sat more as decor than instrument. Naomi Clark moved through it all like a ghost in a pressed black apron. She was on hour 11 of a brutal double shift, and her smile had long since shifted from genuine to mechanical. Her sneakers squeaked with fatigue, and a soft ache radiated from her lower back, crawling up her spine like a whispered warning. The tray balanced and her hands trembled slightly as she turned the corner toward table 8. "Naomi," called Marcus from the expo line, holding up a bread basket with his chin. Table 5's demanding another round, gluten-free this time. Naomi nodded silently, pivoted, and made her way across the labyrinth of linen-covered tables. A soft bead of sweat rolled behind her ear. Her uniform, once crisp and clean, now bore a stubborn coffee stain near the hem. She had tried scrubbing out in the employee bathroom during her 10-minute break. But like everything else in her life lately, it refused to budge. She reached the table, offering the bread with a nod and a quiet, "Here you go, ma'am," before backing away, unnoticed. At the hostess stand, her manager, Cameron Briggs, a man with too much pomade and too little patience, was waiting. "That's the second order you mixed up tonight," he muttered, leaning in so no one else could hear. The Thompson table got salmon instead of steak. Again. Naomi swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "It better not," Cameron said, voice tight. "One more slip, and we're going to have a very different conversation about your position here." "Got it." She nodded quickly and turned away, cheeks burning. Her fingers clenched around her tray until her knuckles turned pale. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not with rent due in 4 days. Not with the second notice from the student loan company sitting on her nightstand like an unpaid ghost. The rest of the night crawled by in slow agony. Customers complained about table spacing, wine temperatures, and their inability to pronounce items on the menu. Naomi moved like a machine, silent, invisible, and absolutely necessary. When the final table left just past midnight, she peeled off her apron, tossed in the laundry bin, and grabbed her purse from the backroom locker. The outside air was crisp, almost cold, a rare gift in Georgia spring. Her bus had stopped running an hour ago, so she walked the 8 blocks home, past the jazz bar where the saxophonist still played with closed eyes, past the corner store with its neon EBT welcome sign flickering like a heartbeat. She climbed 3 flights of creaky stairs, unlocked her apartment door, and stepped into the small, dim space that felt both like a sanctuary and a cage. Inside, the apartment was split into 2 distinct worlds. The left side, a modest futon, a particle board table stacked with unopened bills, a half-empty bottle of ibuprofen on the counter. Practical. Survival. The right side, a keyboard pushed into the corner, its black and white keys dulled by a fine layer of dust. Sheet music scattered like autumn leaves. Old competition trophies lined a crooked shelf, their gold paint chipped and dulled. Forgotten glories. Naomi dropped her bag onto the couch and kicked off her shoes with a groan. She didn't bother to change out of her uniform. Her legs folded under her like a marionette whose strings had been cut, and she collapsed backward. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, letting the silence settle. Then, without even realizing, her fingers began tapping lightly on her thigh. It was second nature. Invisible keys. Phantom music. She had done this since she was a child, especially when she was anxious, especially when she needed to remember who she used to be. 3 years. 3 years since she'd really played. 3 years since the accident, since the funeral, since the dream ended. But her hands, they remembered. She turned her head slowly toward the keyboard in the corner. No, not tonight. She looked away quickly, blinking back the heat behind her eyes. Some wounds still stung too deeply to touch. Some parts of herself were better off silent. She reached for her phone and set an alarm for 7:15 a.m. Another shift tomorrow. Another day of water refills and fake smiles. As her eyes drifted shut, she hummed softly to herself, a melody she hadn't realized she still remembered. One her mother used to play late at night, when bills were overdue and dinner had been just buttered rice. She didn't know it, but that night was the last night the music would be silent. Tomorrow, the wall she had built between past and present would shatter. Tomorrow, someone would demand what she had buried. And when the moment came, the world would hear not just a black waitress to play piano, but a woman who had once lit stages on fire with 10 fingers and a heartbeat. But for now, in the quiet of her apartment, the old sheet music rustled softly in the breeze from a cracked window. The keyboard waited, silent, patient, for the fingers that once made it sing. Naomi arrived at Southern Bloom 15 minutes early the next evening, wearing a freshly laundered uniform and shoes that still ached from yesterday. The moment she stepped through the employee entrance, the air of the restaurant wrapped around her like pressure, clean linen, lemon-polished tension. She barely had time to tie her apron before Cameron's voice came from the host station. "Clark, you're on the Ellison table tonight." She blinked. "Who?" Cameron ran a hand through his slick back hair. "Brandon Ellison, investment executive, brings in a table of whales every quarter. Booked out the entire Magnolia room in the back. Full-course dinner, open bar, wine pairings. And he's expecting music." Naomi's stomach dropped. "I thought the live pianist only came Thursdays and Sundays?" she asked carefully. "Well, this is Wednesday, and the pianist called out this morning." Cameron's voice tightened. "I've already arranged recorded classical, but you know how these money types get. If the wine isn't from Bordeaux and the ambience isn't dripping with Mozart, they throw a tantrum." Naomi swallowed. "Who was supposed to serve the table?" "Lisa, but she called out sick. You're the only one I trust not to spill Pinot Noir on a $1,000 suit." Naomi wanted to argue, wanted to beg for a less visible table, something near the kitchen, where mistakes could be hidden, but she knew better. You didn't argue with Cameron Briggs when you needed your next paycheck. So she nodded. "Got it." By 6:30 p.m., the Magnolia room was dressed like royalty. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandelier. The temperature had been adjusted exactly to 70 degrees. Fresh-cut hydrangeas, white linen napkins folded into art. Every table setting screamed, "We expect perfection." At 6:47 p.m., Brandon Ellison arrived. He didn't walk in, he arrived. Tailored charcoal suit, blue silk tie, silver cufflinks, salt and pepper hair combed with intention. He didn't look at anyone directly, only scanned the room like a man measuring ROI. Naomi watched discreetly from a bar as he approached Cameron at the host stand. "Everything as discussed?" Brandon asked, his voice low and sharp. "Yes, Mr. Ellison. Menu confirmed. Private wine cellar access. Staff fully briefed. And the piano?" Cameron stiffened. "Unfortunately, our pianist fell ill." "No." Brandon's voice cut through the dining room like a razor. "I made this reservation 4 weeks ago, specifically requesting live accompaniment. You assured me it would be handled. We have recorded selections prepared. I didn't ask for background noise. I asked for a pianist." Naomi, balancing 2 glasses of water nearby, flinched as his eyes flicked in her direction. A few minutes later, the Magnolia room filled with suits and heels. Naomi weaved between them, keeping her smile neutral and her movements clean. Brandon sat ahead of the table like a king presiding over a financial summit, his clients listening with 2 eager laughs as he dissected IPOs and mergers. Naomi approached with the water service. "Still or sparkling?" she asked. "Still," Brandon answered, barely looking up. As she poured into the first glass, someone at the table asked, "So what's the entertainment tonight?" Brandon's jaw flexed. "Supposed to be live piano," he said curtly, but apparently we're being given elevator music instead. Naomi reached for the second glass, and unconsciously she hummed, just a few bars. Soft, barely audible. Debussy's Clair de Lune. A melody so deeply ingrained in her hands and voice, it came without permission, but Brandon heard it. He froze mid-sentence and looked directly at her. "Stop." Naomi's hand jerked, the glass wobbling in her grip. He stared at her, eyes narrowing. "You play?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. She shook her head quickly. No, sir. You hummed Debussy just now. Your fingers, he gestured to her hands, the way you hold that glass. That's a pianist's grip. Naomi's heart pounded against her ribs. I used to, she whispered, years ago. Brandon leaned back, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Perfect. Problem solved. Play something. She blinked. Excuse me? The piano's right there. He nodded to the gleaming baby grand in the corner of the room, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows and candlelight. I can't. I haven't played in a long time. I'm spending $6,000 in this restaurant tonight, Brandon said, his tone dropping into quiet menace. You're a Black Waitress to play piano. Surely you can manage one song. Her throat closed. Cameron hovered at the doorway, eyes silently pleading. Don't screw this up. Naomi looked around. Every face at the table was now focused on her. Waiting. If you'd prefer, Brandon added, voice smooth, I can speak directly to the owner about the lack of service quality tonight. I'm sure he'll be thrilled. Naomi's vision blurred slightly. The piano sat polished and proud like a dare. And in that moment, caught between her past, her paycheck, and the eyes of a man who believed he could own the moment, she nodded. Just one song, she whispered. Brandon raised a glass of wine and mock toast. Wonderful. Let's hear what the silence has been hiding. As Naomi stepped toward the piano, the room seemed to shift. She felt the burn of stares across her back, the heat of shame mingling with dread. Every step echoed with the weight of 3 years of absence. 3 years since she touched the keys, since her mother died, since her scholarship vanished with a single phone call. She sat down, adjusted the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys. They trembled, and somewhere in the corner of her mind, the phrase returned like a bitter mantra. Just a Black Waitress to play piano. But when she touched the first note, the room forgot that part. The piano bench was colder than she remembered. Naomi adjusted her posture slowly, every movement feeling like a betrayal of the silence she had lived in for 3 years. Her fingers hovered above the ivory keys, not yet touching. The lights from the chandelier bounced off the piano's glossy lid and cast delicate patterns onto the floor, like reflections of moments long past. The room behind her had gone quiet, eerily quiet. Even the ice and whiskey glasses had stopped clinking. It was as if the entire dining room had paused, holding its breath, waiting to see if the Black Waitress forced to play piano would deliver. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment and tried to slow her breathing. Don't cry. Don't shake. Just one note. But one note could rip everything open. Her mind raced. 3 years ago, she was standing in the audition room at Callahan Music Academy, holding a letter in one hand and her mother's voice in the other. Play it like you mean it, baby. Not for them, for you. She had been accepted. Full scholarship. Top of her class. Then her mother's heart failed. And the music, once her salvation, became the sound of loss. Naomi opened her eyes. Brandon Ellison sat at the head of the table, arms folded, a smirk resting on his lips like this was entertainment. A flex, a challenge. He didn't want music. He wanted to own the moment she gave in. Naomi's hands began to lower. She wasn't doing this for him. She wasn't even doing it for the people watching. She was doing this for the girl who hadn't played since the funeral, who hummed melodies under her breath while wiping down tables, who ran her fingers over invisible keys every time life got too loud. She was doing it for her mother. Her fingertips met the keys. Lightly, tenderly, the first note rang out. It was soft, unassuming, a low A that quivered in the room, like a question she wasn't sure she was ready to ask. Then another, and another. A melody formed, not complex, but haunting, slow, almost hesitant, like a wounded animal testing the ground for traps. Naomi didn't look up. She didn't need to. She could feel the tension unraveling behind her, the shift in atmosphere, the way even Brandon had leaned slightly forward. She was no longer the Black Waitress they'd watched carry trays of bread and pour wine. She was a girl who once played Chopin's Ballade No. 1 blindfolded in high school. The girl who won 3 state competitions back to back by age 16. The girl who, in another life, Might have been on the stage at Carnegie Hall instead of trapped in the corner of a restaurant. Her fingers moved with more confidence now. She didn't plan it. She didn't pick the piece. It picked her. Without thinking, her hands moved into the powerful opening of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. The thunder of its first chord struck the room like a storm rolling in from the horizon. It was bold, assertive, grieving. The music swallowed the air. The clinking stopped. The forks froze. Even the kitchen doors, usually swinging open and shut in rhythmic chaos, still behind their windows. Naomi poured herself into the keys, and the notes poured something back. Memories came rushing like waves. Her mother's humming in the kitchen, the smell of rosemary chicken, the sound of piano lessons echoing in a small two-bedroom apartment, the scream of sirens the night her mother collapsed the last time she held her hand. It wasn't just music anymore. It was mourning. It was resistance. It was rebirth. She didn't see the chef step out of the kitchen, his hands still dusted in flour, mouth slightly open. She didn't see the couple at table 9, now holding hands and staring, tears glistening in one woman's eyes. She didn't see Cameron Briggs at the back wall, stunned into silence, arms no longer crossed. And she certainly didn't see the older woman at the far corner of the room, dressed in navy blue, her gray hair pinned into a tight bun, and a small leather-bound music journal resting beside her wine glass. The woman sat forward, elbows on the table, eyes unblinking, lips parted slightly in recognition. But Naomi felt it. She felt it in the silence that met each note, in the reverence, in the stillness, in the ache of letting go. She reached the climax of the piece, her hands flying now. The keys responded with urgency and fire. The final chord slammed through the room like thunderclaps. Then it was over. A silence deeper than anything came next. Naomi sat frozen, her hands still hovering above the keys, chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The restaurant didn't breathe. No one moved. Until, somewhere in the distance, a fork dropped. Clatter. Then came the applause. It started slow. A gasp. A single clap. Then another. And another. Until the room was roaring. The sound of chairs pushed back, of hands pounding together in stunned disbelief. Naomi blinked, dazed. Her face flushed as she stood, nearly knocking over the bench. She smoothed her apron, out of habit, realizing she was still in uniform, a waitress who had just shattered their expectations. She turned to step away, eyes lowered, but a voice stopped her. "Wait!" Brandon. His tone had changed, less smug now. Less sure. That was... He began, but the words failed. She didn't wait to hear the rest. Naomi walked quickly toward the kitchen doors, head high, adrenaline burning through her veins like gasoline. She didn't know what had just happened, but something had shifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't quiet, and she wasn't done. Naomi didn't stop walking until she hit the back corridor, just past the swinging doors that separated the illusion of fine dining from the smell of sweat, grease, and exhaustion. She leaned against the cold metal of the prep cooler, her chest heaving. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear, not from shame, but from something deeper, like the tremors that come just after an earthquake. Not the destruction itself, but the realization that something underneath has shifted permanently. Behind her, she could still hear the muffled sound of applause. It hadn't stopped. It had, in fact, grown louder since she left the piano. She didn't want to turn around. She didn't want to see those faces. Not yet. "Yo!" came a hesitant voice from the dish pit. It was Damon, the teen who barely said a word to anyone during service. His apron was soaked, and he still held a wet plate in his hand, dripping on the floor. Was that really you? Naomi pressed her lips together. She gave the faintest nod. "I didn't know," Damon muttered, scratching the back of his head. "I mean, damn." She gave him a tired half-smile. "Me neither." Without another word, she slipped past him and ducked into the small employee bathroom, shutting the door behind her and twisting the lock with a quiet click. Inside, under the harsh fluorescent light, Naomi stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes, wide, almost too bright, looked unfamiliar. Her collar was slightly crooked. Her name tag still clipped to her chest like a label she no longer recognized. She slowly raised her hands and looked at her fingers. They were shaking, but not like before. Not with dread, with adrenaline, with release, with memory. Playing again had felt like slicing open a wound she spent 3 years stitching shut. It was painful. It was terrifying. And somehow, it was exactly what she needed. She turned on the cold water and let it run over her wrists. It soothed her, but couldn't cool the fire she'd ignited inside. There was a knock at the door. Soft. "Naomi?" It was Cameron's voice. Manager tone gone. Softer now. Almost careful. She didn't answer. "Listen," he continued. "You need to come out. People are asking about you." Her stomach tightened. "I can't," she said, not opening the door. "Not yet." "You might want to rethink that," he said. "Brandon Ellison wants to speak to you. And there's someone else." Naomi wiped her face with a paper towel and stared once more at herself in the mirror. The weight of what had just happened was still pressing down on her shoulders. She could feel the expectations creeping back in. Opportunity dressed as obligation. But she knew she couldn't stay in here forever. She unlocked the door. Cameron stood in the hall with his hands in his pockets, a look of confusion and awe stitched across his face. "What you did out there," he began, "I had no idea." She shrugged. "It's not who I am anymore. It sure looked like who you are to everyone watching." He motioned toward the front. "Come on, you should hear this." Reluctantly, Naomi followed him back toward the dining area. The restaurant had returned to its ambient buzz, but people were still whispering, still looking toward the piano like it had grown a soul. Conversations had changed. Phones were out. Faces had softened. Brandon Ellison stood near the instrument, his phone in hand, tapping something furiously. But it was the woman beside him who stopped Naomi in her tracks. Elegant, composed, silver gray hair pulled into a graceful twist. A long navy coat draped across her shoulders like she stepped out of a concert hall. Her gaze met Naomi's, direct and unwavering. "There she is," Brandon said, motioning toward Naomi. "This is who I was talking about." The woman smiled slightly, studying Naomi like a composer reads a difficult score. "That was quite a performance, young lady," she said, her voice smooth with authority. "Rachmaninoff is not for the faint of heart." Naomi looked down at the floor. "Thank you, ma'am. But tonight was an exception." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Clearly. And yet you played with extraordinary emotion. Your technique is rusty. Understandable. But your instincts are sharp. That doesn't disappear." Brandon interjected. "She hasn't played in 3 years. Told me herself." The woman tilted her head, intrigued. "Even more impressive." Cameron cleared his throat. "Naomi, this is Dr. Madeline Hart. She's the director of the Westbridge Conservatory." Naomi blinked. Westbridge wasn't just a music school. It was a school. The same one she dreamed of as a teenager. The same one whose brochure she kept folded under her pillow for 2 years. "Dr. Hart." Naomi breathed, unsure what to say. Dr. Hart reached into her coat and pulled out a simple business card. She offered it to Naomi. "We have a program for adult learners with exceptional ability," she said. "Full scholarships. Private instruction. I'd like you to consider applying." Naomi stared at the card but didn't take it. "I can't," she whispered. Dr. Hart didn't flinch. "Why not?" Naomi shook her head. "I just can't. There was too much buried under those keys. Too many ghosts in those chords. Too much pain in the silence that followed the music." Dr. Hart didn't push. She simply placed the card on the piano and gave a small nod. "Music like yours doesn't come along often. Think about it." She turned and left, her heels clicking softly across the floor. Brandon looked almost embarrassed for the first time that night. "For what it's worth," he muttered, "you were remarkable. I owe you an apology for the way I—" Naomi held up her hand. "I need to get back to work." She walked past him before he could say more, slipping into the side hallway that led toward the employee lounge. Her body buzzed with confusion, adrenaline, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. She opened the staff room door, grabbed her coat, and headed for the back exit. She didn't want to be seen right now. Not as a waitress, not as a prodigy, not as a symbol. She needed to be alone, with her thoughts, her memories, her hands. Outside, the air was colder than before. The street lamps cast yellow halos onto the cracked pavement as she walked home. Inside her apartment, she dropped her bag, didn't bother with the lights. She walked straight to the corner, to the keyboard, to the dust, and with a shaking breath, she wiped it clean. Naomi stood in the darkened corner of her apartment, staring at the keyboard like it was a loaded weapon. The dust was gone now, wiped clean with the sleeve of her jacket and the back of her hand. Each key gleamed faintly under the weak light from the kitchen, still carrying the warmth of her fingertips. Her heart thudded like a metronome gone rogue. She hadn't touched this thing in 3 years. Not since that night. Not since the paramedics had wheeled her mother out of their apartment on a stretcher and left behind nothing but a hollow silence where music used to live. The old keyboard didn't have the gravity of a grand piano, but it had something else, memories. Hundreds of them. Of her mother humming softly over the stove while Naomi practiced arpeggios. Of late-night rehearsals before state competitions. Of laughter. Of encouragement. Of belief. She took a slow breath and sat down. The bench creaked. Her fingers hovered again, uncertain. Then, gently, they lowered to middle C. The note echoed through her apartment, like a whisper from another life. She closed her eyes, and she began. The first few chords were slow, hesitant, like a child learning to walk again. She missed a note, paused, tried again. The muscle memory was there, buried beneath the weight of grief, of silence, of survival. But it was there. Then, without warning, her hands moved into Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, the same piece she had played in the restaurant. But this time, it wasn't for a room of strangers. It wasn't for approval or performance or pride. It was for her. The thunderous opening crashed into quiet of her apartment, shattering the stillness with bold, aching chords. Her fingers struck with purpose, not precision, but heart. She faltered, corrected, breathed. The tempo picked up. Her arms moved as if pulled by something ancient and unresolved. The power of the piece surged through her, deep, complex, mournful. The music wasn't just sound. It was every no she'd ever been told. Every opportunity lost to poverty, to grief, to race, to assumption. It was the sound of a black waitress to play piano in a white linen restaurant and steal the air from a room. It was the sound of her mother's heartbeat. It was defiance in D minor. She hit the middle section, those softer lyrical runs, and her shoulders began to loosen. Her breath synchronized with the melody. The apartment began to fade. The past didn't vanish, but it softened. The ghosts in retreat, but they listened. By the time she struck the final chords, tears blurred her vision. She sat still for a moment. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memory, of power, of something finally reclaimed. Her phone buzzed on the countertop, breaking the stillness. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Naomi stood, walked to the counter, and picked it up. 7 text messages. 2 voicemails. 1 missed call from an unknown number. She opened the first message. Marcus, host station. That vid of you playing went viral. Like, viral. Another one popped in. Lisa, server. Why didn't you ever tell us you could do that? Girl? Then, Cameron Briggs. Call me. Now. The owner's asking for you. Her hand trembled as she opened the voicemail from an unfamiliar number. This is Dr. Madeline Hart. Naomi, I left my card at the restaurant. I hope you'll consider what we discussed. You have something rare. Very rare. Please call me. Naomi stared at her screen, then back at the keyboard, then at her reflection in the apartment window, a woman still in uniform. Hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, eyes wide with possibility. Everything had changed in 24 hours. But nothing inside her had shifted more than this. She had felt the music again. Not like a job. Not like a duty. Not like a scar. Like a voice. A second phone buzz interrupted her thoughts. This time, it was a notification. A video link. She clicked. It was a performance, her performance, from Southern Bloom. Someone had recorded it. The camera was shaky, the audio imperfect, but there she was, fingers dancing across the keys, face alive, music pouring from her like fire through a funnel. The caption read, "Black Waitress to play piano and leave an entire room breathless." The comments had already started. "Who is she? She plays like she's bleeding through the keys. Please, someone give this woman a stage." Naomi's breath caught. She read another. "Proof that talent doesn't care where you work or what you wear." Another. "Someone find her. The world needs to hear more." She sat back down, not to escape, to ground herself. She placed her fingers back on the keys. This time, she played a simple melody, one she hadn't touched since she was a kid. The lullaby her mother had written for her on a folded piece of grocery receipt paper. She closed her eyes and played. Outside, Atlanta's night pulsed with life. But inside Naomi's apartment, something else was happening. Something deeper. She wasn't just remembering anymore. She was returning. The next morning, Naomi awoke on the couch, still in her Southern Bloom uniform, curled beneath a worn blanket. The keyboard sat just a few feet away, keys faintly lit by the weak sunlight creeping through her blinds. For a moment, she thought the night before had been a dream, but then she saw her phone. It had blown up. Texts, missed calls, emails from addresses she didn't recognize. One from a reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, another from someone claiming to be a booking agent, and more messages from co-workers than she'd ever received on any birthday. Her video, the video, now at over 53,000 views. Naomi sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, trying to catch her breath before the world could demand more of her. The voicemail notification still blinked. She played the one from Dr. Hart again. "Naomi, this is Dr. Madeline Hart from Westbridge Conservatory. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I'd like to speak with you again, this time properly. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I believe you have something we don't see very often anymore. Truth in your playing." Truth. That word lodged somewhere deep. She wasn't sure she wanted to talk. She wasn't sure she could. So instead, she paced. She watered her neglected plant. She put on water for tea and let it boil over. She showered, but never got around to brushing her hair. The longer she stayed in the apartment, the smaller it felt, like the walls were folding in with every notification ping. Then there was a knock at the door. Naomi froze. She never had visitors. She crept to the peephole. "Cameron." She opened the door halfway. "I know you're off today," he said, holding up his hands like he came in peace. "But we need to talk." Naomi sighed. "If this is about the shift I missed." "It's not." His voice was quieter than usual. "Look, I think you should come down to the restaurant." She arched an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because someone's there, and I think she's waiting for you." 10 minutes later, Naomi stepped into the front entrance of Southern Bloom, a hoodie pulled up over her head. The dining area was quiet, prepped for dinner service, but still empty. A few servers glanced her way, some wide-eyed, others hesitant, like they were seeing her for first time. Cameron led her to the back, toward the Magnolia Room, the place where everything had changed. Seated alone at table 9, right next to the grand piano, was a woman Naomi recognized instantly, even out of context, even without her name. Dr. Madeline Hart. She wore a fitted navy coat and reading glasses that hung from a silver chain. A stack of music programs lay beside her plate. Clearly hand-selected, annotated, some folded at the edges. A woman of ritual and discipline. She looked up the moment Naomi entered and smiled. "I was hoping you'd come." Naomi stood awkwardly. I wasn't sure." Dr. Hart gestured toward the seat across from her. "Please, sit." Naomi did, slowly. Her hoodie still clung to her shoulders like armor. Dr. Hart poured her a glass of water, without asking, like a mother might. "You made quite an impression the other night." Naomi let out a nervous laugh. "So I've heard. I've been in this business for 40 years. Dr. Hart continued. And I can count on one hand the number of times performance stopped a room cold. She paused. Yours did. Naomi stared down at the tablecloth. I wasn't trying to perform. I didn't even want to play. I know, Dr. Hart said gently. That's why it mattered. There was a long silence. Naomi could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the soft ticking of the old wall clock. Then, why did you stop? The question hit harder than Naomi expected. She inhaled slowly. My mom, she passed. It happened suddenly. I was in rehearsal for my senior recital. I came home and she was gone. Dr. Hart bowed her head slightly. I tried going back to the music, Naomi added, voice tightening. But it didn't sound the same. It hurt. It always hurts, Dr. Hart said. That's how you know it's real. Naomi met her eyes. I didn't think I deserved to play anymore. You didn't lose the music, Dr. Hart said firmly. You buried it. That's different. Naomi exhaled through her nose. Feels the same. No, the older woman said. The buried things always fight their way back to the surface. And when they do, we have a choice. Ignore them or let them breathe. Dr. Hart reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded pamphlet. Westbridge Conservatory. She slid it across the table. We have a special advanced adult program, she explained. Private mentorship, performance coaching, full scholarship. If you want it, it's yours. Naomi stared at the brochure. She'd seen it before years ago. Her mother had circled the dates in red ink and taped it to the fridge, back when dreams felt like road maps. Now, the sight of it made her hands sweat. I don't know if I can, Naomi whispered. Dr. Hart leaned forward. Can't or won't. Naomi blinked. Dr. Hart's voice softened. You're afraid. I get that. But fear doesn't mean stop. Sometimes fear means go. I haven't played seriously in years. Then it's time to start. Naomi's eyes welled, but she held it in. What if I fail again? You will, Dr. Hart said without flinching. Over and over. That's how you learn to fly. The room felt quiet again, familiar. Naomi looked down at her hands, still trembling, but this time not from doubt. I don't know how to say yes to something that feels this big. Dr. Hart smiled gently. You just did. She rose, leaving the pamphlet on the table. I'll give you until tomorrow to decide. The application deadline is midnight, but something tells me you already know. Naomi sat in the silence long after she left. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the street. A breeze rattled the magnolia trees. Inside, a Black Waitress to play piano had been offered a chance to play not just for applause, but for freedom. And somewhere deep inside her, she was ready to say yes. Naomi didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. She sat curled up on the worn corner of her couch, hoodie drawn over her head, knees pulled to her chest, eyes locked on the glow of her phone screen. Every time she thought the wave had crested, every time she considered putting the phone down, it buzzed again. Another message, another notification, another headline. The video had now crossed 120,000 views. She watched it again, unable to stop herself. There she was, seated at the piano in Southern Bloom's Magnolia Room. She barely looked like herself. There was something in her posture, in her face, in her hands that seemed unrecognizable. Not artificial, not staged, but lit, like something had ignited from within. The camera shook slightly as the person recording whispered, "She's just a waitress?" That line had made it into the caption, the hashtags, the discourse. Black Waitress to play piano and leave the room breathless. The phrase was now everywhere. Trending on TikTok. Screenshot on Reddit. Pinned to Instagram accounts Naomi had never seen before. Some had clipped just the opening chords. Others shared the powerful final flourish with captions like, "This is what buried talent looks like. She doesn't need a stage. She is the stage." One comment froze her in place. I know that face. Naomi Clark. She won 3 Georgia youth competitions in high school. Wasn't she supposed to go to Callahan Conservatory? Another, this gave me chills. I'm crying at 2 a.m. over a stranger playing Rachmaninoff in a restaurant. And then, like wildfire, The replies poured in, some in awe, some angry at the idea that someone with so much talent was stuck pouring water and balancing bread baskets, some defending the beauty of raw, undiscovered artistry, others arguing about race, class, opportunity. She had become a symbol, a soundbite, a narrative people could twist into whatever they needed, and none of them knew her. None of them knew how she'd stood outside the hospital morgue in her performance dress, holding the final program from her last recital like it was a lifeline. None of them knew she hadn't touched a piano for 3 years, because every note felt like betrayal. None of them had watched her sell her mother's upright Yamaha to cover the funeral deposit, but now they wanted to know her. Her inbox was flooded. Interviews, offers, collab requests. One subject line read, "Good Morning America inquiry, urgent." She dropped the phone on the cushion beside her and stared at the ceiling. Everything was too loud, even the silence. She pressed the heels of her palms into her eyes and tried to breathe. She should have felt excited, validated, liberated, but all she felt was exposed, like someone had ripped her open in front of the world, and now strangers were dissecting her insides, one comment at a time. Her ringtone jolted her. She glanced at the screen. Dr. Hart. Again, the third call today. Naomi let it ring. Then the voicemail came. "Naomi, I imagine this is overwhelming. You don't owe the world anything right now. Just remember, you don't have to perform to be a musician. You already are one. When you're ready, I'm here." Naomi closed her eyes. Those words reached somewhere deeper than any viral caption. She got up, walked across her apartment, and stared down at the keyboard. She didn't play. Not tonight. Instead, she sat next to it and pulled her mother's blanket tighter around her shoulders. She remembered how her mother used to hum lullabies at night, even when Naomi was too old to need them. How she called every small performance a concert. How she once drove 5 hours through a rainstorm just to watch her play a 10-minute piece at a community showcase. She would have loved this moment, but she also would have protected Naomi from it. Naomi's phone buzzed again. She picked it up reluctantly. A message from a name she hadn't seen in years. Maya Johnson, her former roommate at Callahan Conservatory. Naomi's stomach flipped as she opened the text. "Naomi? That's really you, right? Your video is everywhere. I showed it to our old professor, and he cried. I don't know what happened, but the entire faculty's talking. Come back. Please. You were always the most gifted of us." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her past, present, and future were colliding at full speed, and all she could do was sit in the middle and try not to get crushed. Another ping. This one from Southern Bloom's owner. An email. Subject line, "We need to talk about Friday night." She opened it hesitantly. "Naomi, our restaurant's been flooded with calls and bookings. Everyone wants to know when the pianist is playing again. I've just landed back in town. Cameron tells me you've been through a lot, and I want to respect your space. But if you're open to it, we'd love to offer you a formal pianist position. Competitive rate, flexible schedule. You'd be doing what you were meant to do." The final line hit like a whisper. Your hands were meant for more than serving. Naomi stared at the screen, then turned to the keyboard again. Her hands were still trembling. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from possibility. She touched the edge of the keys lightly, like testing the surface of a lake after years of drought. Then she closed her laptop, silenced her phone, and just sat. She didn't need to answer anyone right now. Not Dr. Hart, not the media, not Maya, or Cameron, or Brandon, or the internet. Tonight, she needed only one thing. Silence. Because when the noise finally fades, that's when the real music begins. The apartment was nearly pitch black. Just a soft glow of the streetlight filtered to the blinds, casting faint stripes of orange across the carpet. The hum of the fridge was the only sound breaking the silence. Naomi stood barefoot in front of the keyboard. She hadn't touched it since the video hit 100,000 views. Since her name had become a headline, a hashtag, a soundbite, Black Waitress to play piano. Now the phrase followed her everywhere. On TikTok, in Instagram Reels, even on a local news segment where a panel of strangers debated her talent like she was commodity. And the more the world clapped, the smaller she felt. But here, tonight, there were no eyes, no comments, no demands, just her and the keys. She sat down slowly, exhaling like she was preparing to confess something. Her fingers hovered. But this time, she didn't go to Rachmaninoff, not Debussy, not Chopin. Tonight wasn't about proving she could play the masters. It was about remembering the first song she ever truly felt. Her mother's lullaby. It didn't even have a name. Her mom never wrote it down, just played it for her every night, like a secret share between heartbeats. Naomi had learned it by watching her fingers, mimicking the rhythm, listening in the dark as a child and trying to recreate it the next morning with sticky fingers and too short reach. That lullaby had rocked her to sleep as a girl. Now, it was calling her back as a woman. She pressed a single note, soft, then another, and another. The melody came slowly, hesitant, shy, like a child peeking around a corner. Her fingers found the path without thinking, guided not by memory, but by feeling. Muscle, spirit. It was simple, but it was home. The notes echoed through the room, brushing against the walls like wind through curtains. Halfway through, her throat tightened. She remembered the last time she heard her mother play it. 2 nights before the heart attack. Naomi had just turned 19. She'd been accepted into the Callahan Conservatory and didn't yet know that her mother had taken out a second payday loan to cover her deposits and apartment. Her mother had sat down at the old upright piano, smiling in that tired, proud way she always did, and played the lullaby. "You're going to take this with you," she had said. "I'm too old for lullabies," Naomi had replied. Her mother just winked, then play it for someone else when they need it. Now, in a 1-bedroom apartment she could barely afford, Naomi was doing just that. But the person who needed it was her. She played it again, slower this time, letting each note stretch and breathe. By the 3rd repetition, her fingers stopped shaking, her body relaxed, and her heart didn't feel quite so heavy. The music wasn't just healing, it was cleansing. It was rinsing away the fear, the expectation, the pressure. It didn't care about views or contracts or hashtags. It was just her and the piano. And her mother's voice, quiet, loving, unjudging, woven into every note. She finished with a soft arpeggio and sat in the silence that followed. Then, like the world was waiting for her to open the door, just a crack, her phone buzzed. She let it buzz once, twice, 3 times, and then she picked it up. One message, Dr. Madeline Hart, "I'm still here. The scholarship application closes at midnight. You don't have to say yes for me. Just say yes for yourself." Naomi stared at the message for a long time. It was 11:07 p.m. She didn't move. Not yet. Instead, she stood and walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again, sat on the couch, stood back up. Finally, she walked to the small bookshelf near her bed and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, a single manila folder, her mother's old letters, some programs from past recitals, and, tucked in between, a photo of them at her first competition. She was 10, nervous, dressed in a black blouse 2 sizes too big. Her mother had one hand on her shoulder, beaming with pride. Naomi ran her thumb across the photo's edge and whispered aloud, "If you were here, you'd probably be filling out the application for me." She glanced at the clock. 11:19 p.m. Then she walked back to the desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the link Dr. Hart had sent her earlier that week. Westbridge Conservatory, Advanced Artist Application. She hesitated, then typed Naomi Clark, field after field, education history, musical background, links to any existing performances. She considered uploading the restaurant video, paused, then smiled to herself and typed instead, "Uploaded without consent. I prefer to be heard live." At 11:38 p.m., she hovered over the submit button. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear, from something else, something harder to name. Maybe it was courage. Maybe it was the first true decision she'd made for herself in years. She clicked submit. The confirmation page appeared. Her heart raced. She stared at it, stunned, and then the tears came. Silent, uncontrollable, cleansing. She wasn't crying because she had submitted an application. She was crying because, for the first time since her mother died, she had said yes. To herself, to her talent, to the voice inside her that had never stopped humming, even in the quietest corners. Naomi wiped her eyes and looked at the keyboard one last time before bed. Then she whispered, "We're not done yet." And somewhere in the stillness of night, the lullaby echoed back. 2 days later, Naomi stood in the grand marble lobby of Westbridge Conservatory, hands folded, knees locked, sweat pooling between her shoulder blades despite the spring chill in the air. She felt completely out of place. The walls stretched upward like cathedral. Glass panels poured sunlight over polished tile. A chandelier hung like a promise too expensive to touch. Students moved past her in tailored coats and sleek boots, cradling violin cases or sheet music portfolios, their conversations filled with terms she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Phrase and counterpoint. Tempo rubato. Naomi tugged at the sleeve of the second-hand blouse she'd borrowed from her neighbor and tried to ignore how scuffed her shoes looked under the light. "Naomi Clark?" The receptionist called from behind a sleek oak desk. She turned quickly. "Yes." "She'll see you now. Studio C. Just down the hall." Naomi nodded, whispered a thank you, and began walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. She passed framed portraits of alumni, famous concert pianists, conductors, composers, people with names etched into plaques, people who had never, not once, had to explain why they stopped playing. And then she reached the door, Studio C. She stood in front of it for a moment, let the fear rise. Then she knocked. "Come in," came the voice. Naomi pushed the door open and stepped into a room lined with books, old scores, and one gleaming Steinway grand bathed in soft window light. And beside it stood Dr. Madeline Hart. She wasn't wearing the navy coat this time. She wore black slacks, a charcoal sweater, and no makeup, just that same calm, piercing presence. Naomi straightened. "Thank you for seeing me." Dr. Hart offered a small smile. "Thank you for coming." There was a pause before the older woman stepped forward. "I know this isn't easy, but I want to make something very clear. There's no audition today." Naomi blinked. I thought." "You already auditioned?" Dr. Hart said gently. "You just didn't know it." Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it. "That night, the restaurant, the Rachmaninoff, that wasn't me at my best," she finally said. "That was you at your realest," Dr. Hart replied. "And that's what I'm looking for." She walked to her desk and pulled out a manila folder. "I reviewed your old competition records. You were accepted into Callahan with a full ride. You had top marks in theory and composition. Then everything just stopped." Naomi nodded, ashamed. "My mom passed away. I couldn't stay." "You don't need to explain," Dr. Hart said. "But you do need to know that doesn't erase who you are." She opened the folder and slid it across the desk toward Naomi. "This is your official offer. A seat in our advanced artist program. Private coaching, master classes, chamber ensemble experience. All expenses covered." Naomi stared at the folder. It felt unreal, like holding a portal to a parallel life she'd once glimpsed from a distance, only to have it vanish. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Dr. Hart didn't flinch. "No one ever is. Talent doesn't wait for timing. It just waits to be claimed." Naomi looked at her. "Why me?" Dr. Hart paused, then, with quiet conviction, said, "Because when the world saw a Black Waitress to play piano, I saw a woman who held a room in the palm of her hand. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. That's what makes a musician, not the resume. The need." Naomi bit the inside of her cheek. The tears were closer than she expected. She looked at the Steinway, then back at the folder, then back at Dr. Hart. "I want this," she said finally, "but I'm scared." "Good," Dr. Hart said. "If you weren't, I'd be worried." There was a knock at the door. Dr. Hart opened it to reveal a tall man in a tailored suit, a familiar face Naomi wasn't expecting. Brandon Ellison. He stepped inside with a brief nod. I hope I'm not intruding." Naomi froze. "What are you doing here?" Dr. Hart gestured between them. "Brandon reached out after your performance. He's offered to fund a scholarship in your name for underrepresented talent from low-income backgrounds." Naomi blinked. "A scholarship?" Brandon nodded. "The Clark Resurgence Fund. Your performance lit something in people. It'd be a waste not to channel that energy into something lasting." Naomi crossed her arms. "You humiliated me in front of that room." His expression shifted, less smug, more sincere than she'd ever seen it. "I did," he admitted, "and I was wrong. But I saw what the world sees now. You're a force, Naomi. This," he gestured at the room, "is where you belong." She looked at Dr. Hart, who gave a tiny, nearly imperceptible nod. Naomi turned back to Brandon. "I'm not a symbol. I'm not here to be saved." "You don't need saving," he said. "You just need space to do what you were born to do." She didn't respond. Instead, she walked over to the piano, ran her fingers along the lid, felt the weight of it, the history, the invitation. Then she sat down, without a word. She began to play her mother's lullaby, not for Brandon, not for Dr. Hart, not even for herself this time, but for every person out there who never got the chance to reclaim the sound inside them. The final note rang out like a bell in a church. When she finished, neither of them clapped. They just stood in reverent silence. Because sometimes you don't need applause. You just need to remember who you are. 6 months later, the dressing room smelled like fresh lilies and old wood polish. Naomi stood alone in front of a tall mirror framed by vintage bulbs, the kind that made the air feel like 1950s Broadway. A long black concert gown hugged her frame, a gift from Dr. Hart, who presented it with the simple words, "You'll need this sooner than you think." Naomi didn't recognize herself, not because she looked glamorous, but because, for the first time in years, she didn't look afraid. The name on the printed program resting beside her violin-shaped jewelry box confirmed it. Naomi Clark, piano recital. Below her name, a title, Coming Home. There was no mistaking the headline on the posters that had gone up all over the Westbridge campus and beyond. Black Waitress to play piano. Now a star returns the stage. She had cringed the first time she saw it. The phrase that once reduced her to a viral moment was now being used as a brand, a tagline, a declaration. But tonight, Naomi didn't shrink from it, because she had redefined what it meant. She wasn't just a black waitress to play piano anymore. She was Naomi Clark, pianist, composer, storyteller. Her hands no longer served tables. They served truth. A soft knock on the dressing room door snapped her out of her thoughts. 5 minutes. Came the voice of the stage manager. Naomi nodded. "Thank you." As the footsteps retreated, she turned back to mirror. Her hair was pinned in a soft twist, curls tucked neatly. Around her neck hung her mother's pendant, a thin gold locket, slightly tarnished, but radiant against her skin. Her fingers hovered over the piano keys in her mind. She took a deep breath. She was ready. The lights in the Westbridge recital hall dimmed. The audience stilled. Naomi stood backstage, just behind the curtain, peeking out at the sea of faces. The front row was packed. She spotted Cameron and the entire Southern Bloom staff, all wearing small golden forepins on their jackets and dresses. Even Damon, the shy dishwasher, was there, grinning nervously in a pressed white shirt. Beside them, Dr. Hart sat with her arms folded and a rare softness in her expression. Years of training musicians couldn't quite prepare her for what she was about to witness tonight. And there was Brandon Ellison, sitting silently with a different kind of intensity, his name now quietly tied to the Clark Resurgence Fund, a scholarship that had already helped 6 students enroll that semester. Further back, Naomi noticed faces she didn't recognize. Young music students from around the country, piano teachers, conservatory recruiters, and audience members who had flown in after following her story online. Even now, videos of that night at Southern Bloom were still making rounds, passing the 1 million view mark. But this night, this room was hers. The stage manager gave her the nod. Naomi walked out into the lights. The applause was immediate, loud, enthusiastic, rising like a wave. But she didn't bow yet. She moved to the Steinway waiting for her at center stage, took her seat, adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap, and looked up. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady. Tonight's performance is called Coming Home. It's a journey through pieces that shaped me, and a final piece that was written not by a composer from centuries ago, but by someone I loved. The hall went silent. "I'll begin," she said, with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was the first piece that ever made my mother cry, not from sadness, but from pride. And then she played. The notes poured like rain on glass, gentle, precise, emotional. Her fingers danced with grace, years of practice and passion, finally reunited without friction. Chopin gave way to Liszt, then to Debussy, then to a brief moment of rawness as she played the Rachmaninoff Prelude, the one that had launched her into the spotlight against her will. But this time, it wasn't out of survival. It was command. The audience didn't just clap. They felt every note. Then, as the light shifted to a golden hue, Naomi paused, lifted her hand slowly, and leaned into the mic once more. I like to close with a composition titled Coming Home, based on a lullaby written by my mother, expanded into something I hope reflects not only her legacy, but the path I had to walk to hear her again. She began with a single note, soft, familiar, the lullaby, the same one she'd played in the dark of her apartment months ago. But now it was bigger, layered with harmony, movement, and maturity. The melody soared, then dipped, then rose again. By the final section, her fingers moved like waves across the keys, expressive, free, undeniable. When the last note faded, the room didn't erupt immediately. It exhaled, and then the applause came, louder than anything Naomi had ever known. People rose to their feet. Some cried, some cheered, some simply stared, moved in ways they couldn't articulate. Naomi stood and bowed deeply, and when she rose, she looked upward and whispered only loud enough for herself, "We did it, Mom." Backstage, her dressing room was now filled with bouquets, cards. A single envelope lay on her chair. Naomi opened it. It was a handwritten note from Dr. Hart. "Your mother would be proud. But more importantly, Naomi, now you are, too. This isn't your final act. This is your opening scene." Naomi closed her eyes, pressing the letter gently to her chest. Then she opened her phone. Another message was waiting. A young student from Philadelphia had sent a video of herself practicing the same lullaby, note for note, calling it Naomi's song. The video ended with the girl saying, "One day, I'll be brave enough to play on a stage. Just like you." Naomi smiled. No longer viral. No longer invisible. Just seen. Fully. The following morning, Naomi awoke to soft sunlight cutting across her new apartment. Gone were the flickering bulbs and paper-thin walls of her old place. This space, modest but full of light, held a baby grand piano position proudly in the center of the living room. It had taken up nearly all of her scholarship funds and a generous contribution from Brandon Ellison. But it wasn't just furniture. It was a declaration, a beginning, and it was hers. On the mantel above the piano sat a single photo, Naomi and her mother, cheek to cheek, backstage at her first solo recital. Her mother's hand rested on her shoulder, and the joy in her eyes wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Naomi reached up and gently touched the frame. "Tonight's for you," she whispered, because in a few short hours, she would take the stage at the City Symphony Gala, a benefit concert raising funds for Clark Resurgence Fund, now entering its second cycle. What started as a single viral video of a black waitress to play piano had now become something much greater, a platform, a legacy, an echo of all the unheard voices who never got their chance to be seen beyond their uniforms. Naomi dressed slowly that afternoon, letting every movement feel intentional. Her gown was charcoal, with sheer sleeves and subtle embroidery of magnolia petals. Dr. Hart's idea, of course. Around her neck, she wore her mother's pendant. Her nails were trimmed short. Her shoes were polished. And her hands, those hands, felt steady. By the time she arrived at the Paramount Hall, a sleek modernist venue glowing with golden backlights and red carpets, a crowd had already gathered. Photographers snapped pictures. A reporter called out, "Naomi, Naomi, how does it feel to be performing in your first symphony gala?" She turned, smiled gently, and answered, "It feels like coming home." Inside, the audience filled every seat. Donors, artists, teachers, students from the scholarship program. Southern Bloom's entire team sat together near the stage, dressed like a proud family. In the balcony, Naomi caught sight of Maya Johnson, her former roommate at Callahan Conservatory, waving with both hands. They'd reconnected weeks earlier. Maya had driven from D.C. to be here. Dr. Hart was already seated in the wings, clipboard in hand, glasses perched low on her nose, though Naomi knew she wouldn't write a word tonight. Brandon Ellison arrived late, true to form, but not with arrogance this time. He sat quietly in the back row, no fanfare, no assistant. Just presence, just pride. As the house lights dimmed, Naomi stood backstage behind the curtain, heartbeat calm, breath steady. The host took the stage. Tonight, we welcome a voice that emerged from silence. A pianist who reminded the world that talent doesn't wear name tags, and artistry doesn't live only in concert halls. Please welcome Naomi Clark. Applause rose like a tide. Naomi stepped into the spotlight. This time, there was no hesitation. She sat at the Steinway in center stage, hands resting gently on the keys. The lights dimmed to a warm amber. The hall hushed, and Naomi began her final piece of the evening, Coming Home. The composition was entirely hers. Built around a lullaby her mother had once played, it had been expanded into something cinematic, full of movements, rises, and retreats, like memory. The first bars were familiar, soft, slow, maternal. Each note carried the scent of Sunday stew, the hush of bedtime prayers, the pressure of a hug that didn't need words. Naomi let the melody unfold naturally, like breathing. Then came the middle section, newly written, where the key changed and the tempo grew erratic. Here lived the grief, the 3 years of silence, the fear, the shame, the weight of walking into a restaurant and becoming a spectacle before she could become herself again. Her fingers danced furiously, eyes closed, shoulders relaxed, mind somewhere else, somewhere deeper. The music didn't just echo her pain. It translated it, transformed it, released it, and just when the chaos reached its peak, the melody slowed again, gentle chords lifting like sunrise over weary hills. She returned to the lullaby, but this time, it wasn't as a daughter listening in the dark. It was as a woman, holding the memory, honoring it, and then releasing it one note at a time. As the final chords floated into stillness, Naomi lifted her hand from the keys. Silence followed, not awkward silence, sacred silence. Then, slowly, like the audience had to remember how to breathe, came the applause, soft at first, then thunderous. People rose to their feet, some wiped tears. Others simply stood with their hands over their hearts. Naomi stood, bowed deeply, and for a brief moment, tilted her face upward, eyes glistening. Backstage, after the curtain dropped, she stepped into her dressing room to find Dr. Hart waiting with an envelope in hand. No flowers this time, just a single letter. Naomi opened it. In elegant handwriting, it read, "Your mother would be proud. But tonight proved what I've known all along. You don't play to impress. You play to awaken. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. Welcome home, Naomi. M.H." Naomi folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and sat quietly at the edge of the bench. Her phone buzzed. Dozens of new messages. Hundreds of new tags. But she ignored them. She pulled out a small voice recorder, one her mother had once used to track late-night musical ideas, and whispered into it, "Coming home. Completed." And then, for the first time in years, Naomi smiled. Not for anyone else. Not for the audience. Not for applause. Just for herself. The buzz didn't stop for days. After Naomi's performance at the City Symphony Gala, her phone became an avalanche of notifications. Emails from festival curators, invitations from European conservatories, a feature request from the New Yorker. Even NPR left a message. "We'd love to feature your story on Tiny Desk. Just you, the piano, and the truth." But Naomi hadn't replied to anyone. Not yet. She had retreated back into her apartment. The one filled with light, warmth, and no expectations. Her piano sat in the center of the living room, silent but ready. Her concert gown hung near the closet, the scent of stage lights and roses still faintly clinging to the fabric. The Clark Resurgence Fund was already receiving applications for its second year. Everything was moving, but Naomi paused. She needed to breathe before stepping into whatever came next. On the third day after the concert, she brewed a cup of mint tea and sat at the piano, not to practice, not perform, but to reflect. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then fell into a soft scale. She wasn't thinking about technique. She was just feeling. Outside, the city was wide awake. Inside, she was finally still. A soft knock at the door startled her. She stood slowly, unsure who it might be. When she opened it, she was met with a face she hadn't seen in over a decade. Mrs. Lorette Green, her childhood piano teacher, still wearing her signature red lipstick and oversized glasses, still with a satchel full of old scores over her shoulder. Naomi gasped, "Mrs. Green." Lorette smiled. "I saw the concert online. Cried right through the second movement. I figured it was time I finally showed up and said what I never got the chance to say when you vanished." Naomi stepped aside without hesitation. "Please, come in." They sat together near the piano, two women with generations between them, connected by octaves, grief, and grace. "I always knew you had more than talent," Lorette said, sipping her tea. "You had honesty. Every note you played told the truth, even when it hurt." Naomi blinked hard. "I couldn't play for a long time. After my mom passed, I didn't know how to come back to it without feeling like I was betraying her." "You weren't betraying her," Lorette said gently. "You were carrying her, and it was heavy. Grief isn't something you conquer, Naomi. It's something you compose with." Naomi nodded, her throat tight. "She'd be proud of what you did," Lorette continued. "Not because it went viral. Not because you wore the gown and played under the lights. But because you found your way back on your own terms." Naomi glanced at the keyboard. "I submitted my application to Westbridge because I was scared to let the music die with her. But now I know I'm not just here to keep her voice alive. I'm here to find mine too." Lorette placed a hand on Naomi's wrist. "Then you're exactly where you need to be." Later that evening, after Lorette had gone, Naomi sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by handwritten letters and recordings from her mother, old scribble ideas for compositions, voice memos of lullabies, notes written in the margins of sheet music. She'd always viewed her mother as the keeper of the gift, but now she understood. Her mother hadn't given her the music to protect it. She had given it to Naomi to let it grow. That night, Naomi opened her laptop and began to compose again. A new piece, not a performance piece, not something for stage or show, but something for herself. She titled it Stillness Between Applause. It was slow, intimate, quiet. She wrote it while wrapped in her mother's blanket, a candle flickering nearby, and the windows cracked open just enough to let in the city's hum. A week later, she walked through the halls of Southern Bloom, not as a waitress, but as a guest. Cameron greeted her at the front, arms crossed but eyes soft. "You sure you're not here to reclaim your section?" Naomi laughed. "No apron, no tray, just dinner." Inside, the Magnolia Room had been subtly transformed. Where once a bland beige wall had stood, now hung a framed photo of her playing the restaurant's grand piano that fateful night. Below it, a brass plaque read, "Here, Naomi Clark reminded the world that brilliance is often hiding in plain sight." She stared at it for a long moment. It didn't embarrass her. It didn't reduce her. It simply told the truth. After her meal, complimentary, of course, she stepped to the piano again. Guests had whispered as she entered. Now the room held its breath. She didn't say anything. She just sat and began to play Stillness Between Applause for the first time. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. When she finished, she didn't wait for clapping. She stood, smiled softly, and nodded. That was enough. Later that night, Naomi sat in her apartment with a cup of tea and a quiet heart. She picked up a pen and began writing a letter to herself. You are not just a moment. You are a movement. You are not a hashtag. You are a home. You are not waiting for permission. You've already arrived. Keep playing. Not to prove. Not to impress. Just to remember that you were always music. You are not a Black Waitress to play piano. You are Naomi Clark. And the world is finally listening. She folded the letter, slipped it into the music stand of her piano, and pressed a single note. Clear. True. Home. If Naomi's journey moved you, if her music spoke to something deep inside you, don't let the story end here. Hit subscribe to follow more powerful stories like this. Give this video a like if it inspired you, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice, no matter how quiet, deserves to be heard.